The seventh party system unfolded during an era of globalization, technological acceleration, and deepening cultural divides. From Bill Clinton's centrist pragmatism through George W. Bush's wars on terror, to Barack Obama's historic rise, and finally Donald Trump's populist breakthrough, America was both advancing and fragmenting. The system was marked by expanding free trade, the internet revolution, social media, and the re-emergence of fierce debates about identity, values, and national direction. Immigration reshaped the American demographic landscape. The 1990s and 2000s saw significant waves from Latin America and Asia, which helped fuel both economic growth and cultural debates. Multiculturalism was championed as a new civic ideal, but it also sharpened divisions over assimilation, national identity, and the limits of diversity policies. Political parties increasingly struggled to reconcile rising cultural pluralism with the legacy of second-wave feminism continued to ripple through institutions. More women entered the workforce and higher education than ever before, reshaping family life and workplace dynamics. But alongside these gains came cultural and political debates about marriage, family breakdown, and the consequences of redefining gender roles. The rise of family versus career tensions reflected a broader struggle between traditional values and modern individualism. Within this multicultural context, the Black community itself was undergoing transformation. Jesse Jackson popularized the term African American. He argued it paralleled identifiers like Italian American, Irish American, or Jewish American, linking people to both a cultural heritage and American citizenship. For Jackson, African Americans were now at that level of maturity. While on the ground, declining marriage rates, weakened educational outcomes, and dependence on government programs was eroding much of the earlier progress gained in the fifth-party system from 1920s through 1950s. The 2008 election of Barack Obama was a milestone in representation. However, it did not resolve the deeper cultural and economic challenges that persisted. Gains in middle-class stability were fragile, as seen in the devastating loss of Black wealth during the 2008 housing collapse. These struggles were not confined to one group. Working-class whites faced their own decline as manufacturing moved offshore. Hispanic immigrants juggled rapid upward mobility with barriers in education and assimilation. Asian communities, often praised for strong family and educational outcomes, faced stereotyping and their own identity debates. Across the board, American families faced rising instability, communities wrestled with shifting cultural norms, and politics became increasingly tribal. Will the seventh-party system end in rupture, not reform? Wall Street prospers while wages are stagnated. Technology empowers individuals but also eroded trust. Social media amplifies outrage while weakening deliberation. Populism surges on both the left and right, rejecting establishment consensus. This era will leave behind enduring questions. Can a multicultural nation thrive without a unifying vision? Can liberty be sustained without strong families and shared responsibility? And as identity continues to dominate politics, will Americans rediscover the common civic ground that once held them together, or fragment further into rival camps? Bill Clinton's election in 1992 marked a Democratic shift to the political center. As a new Democrat, he embraced free trade, welfare reform, and fiscal restraint while seeking to recapture white suburban moderates. His presidency presided over remarkable economic growth and the optimism of the internet boom, yet also hardened partisan divisions, culminating in impeachment over the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which signaled an era of permanent political warfare. For Black Americans, Clinton was both a symbol of inclusion and a source of frustration. His ability to connect with Black voters earned him the nickname the first Black president from some admirers. Yet his 1994 crime bill and welfare reform cut deeply into Black communities, entrenching mass incarceration and fraying the safety net. The Democratic Party increasingly relied on Black voter loyalty, even as its policies often favored Wall Street over Main Street. Economically, globalization and technological change transformed America. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, accelerated outsourcing, hollowing out industrial jobs while fueling growth in finance and tech. Rising inequality was masked by stock market gains, but beneath the surface, wage stagnation and job insecurity planted seeds of discontent that would later explode into populism. The 1994 midterms swept Republicans into power, ending 40 years of Democratic control of the House. Newt Gingrich's contract with America promised smaller government, tax cuts, and welfare reform, reshaping the GOP as the party of ideological discipline and conservative culture. Politics became sharper, with both parties viewing opponents less as rivals and more as existential threats. For African Americans, this shift carried real consequences. Republican leaders tied welfare reform to stereotypes of black poverty, stoking resentment against government programs that disproportionately supported black families. Black churches and civil rights organizations resisted, warning that the Republican agenda rolled back hard-won gains of the Great Society. This growing divide cemented African Americans as the most loyal Democratic constituency. Economically, the 1990s dot-com boom lifted GDP, but benefits were uneven. Wealth concentrated in coastal cities and high-tech sectors, while deindustrialized regions languished. The divergence between a booming Wall Street and struggling working-class communities revealed a widening class divide that politicians increasingly weaponized. By the end of Bill Clinton's presidency in 2000, the black community stood at a crossroads of progress and struggle. Marriage rates and two-parent households had declined significantly since the 1960s, with barely one-third of black children being raised in married couple families, a shift that reshaped community stability and generational wealth. Educational attainment showed promise. High school completion rates rose and more African Americans entered college. Yet gaps in graduation and resources persisted compared to white peers. Economically, the late 1990 boom brought record-low black unemployment and some upward mobility, but it did not close the racial wealth divide. Median black household wealth remained only a fraction of white wealth, and mass incarceration from the 1994 crime bill disproportionately harmed black men and families. The Clinton era left behind both the hope of rising opportunity and the scars of systemic inequality, a paradox that defined black America on the eve of a new century. The 2000 election exposed deep cracks in America's democratic machinery. The contested results in Florida, with hanging chads and a Supreme Court ruling, showed how fragile trust in institutions could be. Then came September 11, 2001, a single morning that changed everything. 4 hijacked commercial airliners struck with shocking precision. 2 against the Twin Towers in New York, 1 against the Pentagon, and another that crashed in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost in those attacks, and the world watched in horror as what was once abstract about terrorism became painfully real. Bush responded as a wartime president. Calls for unity, grief shared publicly, and a renewed resolve. But what followed were also sweeping changes in surveillance, foreign policy, and the limits of civil liberties. In the wake of 9/11, Bush's America was remade. Congress and the executive branch pushed through the Patriot Act, the authorization for use of military force, and massive reorganizations of intelligence agencies, all in the name of national security. Domestic life shifted. Travel became more tightly controlled. Fear became part of daily routines, and the public traded some liberty for what it hoped was safer. Globally, the U.S. launched the war in Afghanistan, later Iraq, setting in motion conflicts that would shape international relations for decades. It also set deep debates in motion. How far should a democracy go in curbing freedoms in order to protect itself? And what are the true costs of that sacrifice? For many African Americans, this shift echoed an old story. Civil rights leaders remembered J. Edgar Hoover's relentless surveillance of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the NAACP in the 1960s. Now, King's son, Martin Luther King III, and other black activists warned that post-9/11 surveillance powers would again fall heaviest on minorities. Muslim mosques were targeted, but so too were black grassroots organizers who opposed the Iraq War or demanded justice in cases of police violence. What had once been COINTELPRO in the Cold War era now returned under new names, with the same suspicion that dissent equaled disloyalty. Economically, the early 2000s looked deceptively strong. Easy credit, rising home ownership, and the housing bubble created a sense of prosperity, especially in black neighborhoods where subprime loans opened doors to first-time buyers. Yet beneath the surface, predatory lending set traps. Adjustable rate mortgages and high interest rates, many targeting African American families at risk to default on their loans. Wall Street profited while households took on fragile debt. By 2006, the bubble was already straining, setting up the collapse that would devastate black wealth in the Great Recession. The post-9/11 era redefined government power. The Patriot Act expanded surveillance, Guantanamo Bay became a symbol of indefinite detention, and the Iraq War divided the nation. Partisanship grew toxic, with Republicans rallying around Bush's war leadership and Democrats fractured between patriotism and dissent. George W. Bush's second term began with the weight of war. Re-elected in 2004 after casting himself as a steady hand in the fight against terror, Bush doubled down on the war in Iraq even as public support waned. The promise of quick victory had faded into insurgency, sectarian violence, and rising American casualties. In 2007, facing mounting criticism, Bush authorized the Surge, a controversial escalation that temporarily stabilized Iraq, but deepened divisions at home. Abroad, America's image was tarnished by revelations of torture at Abu Ghraib and indefinite detention at Guantanamo Bay, fueling anti-American sentiment and complicating alliances. On the home front, Bush's presidency revealed the strain between ideology and reality. His push for Social Security privatization failed, and Hurricane Katrina in 2005 exposed the limits of federal response, shaking confidence in government leadership, especially among Black Americans who saw neglect laid bare in New Orleans. Yet Bush also left a more compassionate mark through initiatives like PEPFAR, the global AIDS relief program that saved millions of lives in Africa. These contradictions, aggressive foreign policy alongside humanitarian outreach, defined his legacy as both polarizing and complex. By 2008, the financial crisis overshadowed everything. Years of deregulation, risky lending, and speculative bubbles crashed into reality, triggering the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. Bush authorized emergency bailouts to stabilize banks, but the damage was done. Millions lost homes, jobs, and retirement savings. His presidency closed with exhausted wars, shaken faith in institutions, and an economy in freefall. Yet it also set the stage for Barack Obama's rise, as Americans looked for new leadership to restore confidence and rebuild at home and abroad. When Barack Obama announced his bid for the presidency in February 2007, few expected the fresh face from Illinois to shake up the political world so profoundly. He entered the Democratic primaries as an underdog against heavyweights like Hillary Clinton and John Edwards. But Iowa shifted everything. Obama won the Iowa caucuses, in part because he inspired first-time voters and independents hungry for something different. Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign was groundbreaking in using social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and MySpace. This innovative approach set a new standard for political engagement, fundamentally changing how campaigns are run and how politicians interact with voters. The general election of 2008 was historic on many levels, not least because Obama became the first African-American major party candidate to win the presidency. His campaign message, "Change we can believe in," resonated against a backdrop of war fatigue, economic uncertainty, and public frustration with political stagnation. Voters turned towards something new, a symbol more than just a candidate. Obama beat John McCain decisively, flipping 9 states that had gone Republican in 2004, states like Virginia, Indiana, Florida, and Ohio. The win was also a testament to using a big and diverse volunteer base to reach communities across racial, generational, and geographic divides. As history was being made, Obama's first term would begin with enormous challenges. He inherited the worst financial crisis in decades, with markets collapsing, unemployment rising sharply, and the auto industry teetering. His administration responded with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, often called the stimulus, to stem the economic freefall and rebuild trust. He also advanced historic legislation like the Affordable Care Act, ACA, pushing healthcare reform to extend insurance to millions who had been uninsured. Banking reform, consumer protection, and oversight of risky financial practices followed, seeking to restrain the kind of behavior that led to the crash. Yet Obama's early years were also defined by tension between hope and backlash, promise and persistence. Internationally, he sought to recalibrate America's posture, winding down combat operations in Iraq and refocusing efforts in Afghanistan, engaging diplomatically in climate change negotiations, and repositioning America's moral voice after the Bush years. Domestically, he faced the complexity of navigating racial tensions and disparities as the nation's first Black president. In the light, the African-American community also reflected the largest number of racial disparities in key areas such as single-parent households, education, wealth, crime, and healthcare. On top of that, Obama was also facing a rising protest movement, particularly around police violence, even as he sought incremental reforms. In this mix, his presidency became not just about policy wins and losses, but about altering what America believed it could be. After the sweeping Democratic victories of 2008, the 2010 midterms delivered a sharp correction. Fueled by frustration over the Affordable Care Act and stimulus spending, the Tea Party movement energized conservatives, helping Republicans retake the House of Representatives in one of the largest midterm swings since World War II. For conservatives, this was vindication, proof that Obama's vision of expanded government had overreached. For liberals, it was a sobering reminder that structural change faced fierce opposition and that progress would demand compromise. The Republican House forced Obama into constant negotiation. Showdowns over the debt ceiling in 2011 threatened the nation's credit rating, and budget stalemates led to bitter partisan clashes. Conservatives praised the GOP for restraining spending and blocking what they saw as government excess. Liberals, however, warned that austerity politics stifled recovery and undermined social protections. Obama navigated these fights by framing himself as the adult in the room, urging balance and responsibility while resisting what he called reckless brinkmanship. Abroad, Obama oversaw the operation that killed Osama bin Laden in 2011, a high point that won bipartisan approval and reinforced his reputation for measured leadership. Yet foreign policy victories did not ease domestic polarization. His support for intervention in Libya and a cautious exit from Iraq drew mixed reviews, with conservatives accusing him of weakness and liberals split over the scope of U.S. involvement overseas. In February 2012, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager in Florida, ignited national debate. For many liberals and civil rights advocates, the case symbolized persistent racial profiling and unequal justice. Conservatives, while acknowledging the tragedy, pushed back against what they saw as politicization before due process. When Obama remarked, "If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon," it highlighted his personal stake in the conversation, but also deepened partisan divides. The episode foreshadowed how race and identity politics would dominate the culture in the years ahead. Despite polarization, Obama's re-election campaign emphasized economic recovery, healthcare reform, and the killing of bin Laden. Liberals hailed his defense of the middle class and vision of inclusivity. Conservatives argued his policies prolonged hardship and grew dependency. Yet Obama's coalition, the black community, feminist progressive liberals, young voters, and urban professionals, held strong. His victory over Mitt Romney in November 2012 made him the first Democrat since FDR to win 2 consecutive terms with a majority of the popular vote. Obama's re-election was more than survival. It was historic renewal. It underscored how demographics, culture, and identity had become central to American politics, for better and for worse, in an era defined by division and change. Barack Obama's second term began in January 2013 with high hopes. Fresh off a decisive re-election victory, he promised to finish the work of perfecting our union. Yet the years that followed revealed the limits of presidential power in an era of partisan polarization, economic unease, and cultural division. Liberals saw Obama's second term as an opportunity to expand the Affordable Care Act, strengthen environmental protections, and advance immigration reform. For many, his agenda symbolized progress toward a more inclusive and equitable society. Conservatives, however, viewed his re-election as a mandate for government overreach. They saw the ACA rollout plagued with failures, feared expanding regulations, and believed that executive actions, particularly on immigration, bypassed constitutional checks and balances. For African Americans, Obama's second term carried symbolic pride but unresolved challenges. The community continued to press for government policies to close disparities in income, education, and criminal justice. Yet economist Thomas Sowell argued that persistent problems, high rates of single-parent households, poor educational outcomes, and low workforce participation reflected cultural and policy patterns, not just systemic bias. Sowell warned that dependency on government programs entrenched disadvantage, while real progress required strengthening families, education, and self-reliance. The 2014 shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson catalyzed the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which not only reshaped national conversations on race, but also pioneered new forms of social justice brand marketing. BLM turned hashtags into organizing tools, protests into viral spectacles, and slogans into marketable symbols that corporations, nonprofits, and universities eagerly adopted. For liberals, it highlighted systemic racism in policing and criminal justice. Conservatives, however, argued that it undermined law and order while fueling anti-police sentiment. In the midst of the branding and cultural battles, Sowell's observation remained striking. Narratives of oppression often overshadowed the deeper structural issues: family breakdown, failing schools, and declining personal responsibility that most profoundly shaped outcomes in Black communities. The second term also saw profound cultural shifts. In 2012, Obama had become the first sitting president to publicly endorse same-sex marriage. By 2015, the Supreme Court's ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. Liberals celebrated this as a milestone for civil rights and pointed to Obama's support as pivotal in shifting public opinion. Conservatives, however, saw it as an example of cultural elites, with presidential blessing overriding traditional values and states' rights. This victory not only cemented Obama's legacy as a president aligned with progressive social change, but it also signaled a shift in the Democratic Party priorities. The LGBT community had now become the group with the most important social-political capital. At the same time, events like the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson in 2014 and the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement heightened national tensions. Liberals called attention to systemic racism. Conservatives argued for law and order. These debates further polarized the country and left many feeling unheard by Washington. By 2015-2016, anger at Gridlock, disillusionment with elites, and cultural conflict fueled a populist wave. On the left, Bernie Sanders rallied voters around economic justice. On the right, Donald Trump gave voice to working-class resentment and distrust of institutions. Both movements thrived on the perception that America's leaders were out of touch. To liberals, Obama's second term left a legacy of expanded healthcare coverage, climate agreements, and cultural breakthroughs like same-sex marriage. To conservatives, it left a trail of executive overreach, mounting debt, and cultural transformation imposed from the top down. For African Americans, it was a bittersweet era. Immense symbolic representation, but lingering disparities that policy alone could not resolve. The gridlock, polarization, and cultural upheavals of Obama's second term set the stage for Donald Trump's election. What began as a presidency of hope and change ended by revealing the fractures of a nation where faith in institutions was waning and the appeal of populism was rising. It began in June 2015, when Donald J. Trump rode down the golden escalator of Trump Tower and declared he was running for president. His announcement was blunt, controversial, and instantly unforgettable. While political elites laughed him off, millions of Americans who felt ignored by Washington heard a voice speaking directly to them. Trump's message was simple and raw. The system was broken, politicians were corrupt, jobs had vanished overseas, and only he had the courage to fix it. Immigration, trade, and draining the swamp became his rallying cries. What began as a long-shot campaign quickly turned into a populist uprising. On the debate stage, Trump clashed with rivals and the media alike. When Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly pressed him about his treatment of women, he pushed back harder. Instead of sinking his campaign, the controversy reinforced his image as a fighter against political correctness. Each scandal, each insult, each outburst, rather than destroying him, fueled his base even more. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton entered the race as the presumed frontrunner. With decades of experience as First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State, she promised steady, seasoned leadership. But her path was rockier than expected. Senator Bernie Sanders gave her an unexpectedly strong challenge, exposing a divide inside the Democratic Party. And the lingering shadow of her private email server raised questions about trust that never fully faded. As 2016 wore on, the contrast sharpened. Trump turned rallies into spectacles of rebellion, tapping into the anger of working-class voters in the Rust Belt. Clinton leaned on her historic candidacy as the first woman nominated by a major party, appealing to progressives, minorities, and suburban moderates. But pivotal moments defined the campaign. Clinton's remark that half of Trump's supporters belonged in a basket of deplorables reinforced the very resentment Trump was channeling. Trump's Access Hollywood tape nearly derailed his bid, but he rebounded with fierce attacks on Clinton's record, framing himself as the outsider against the corrupt establishment. And then, just days before the election, FBI Director James Comey announced a new review of Clinton's emails. Though she was cleared again, the damage was done. Doubts about honesty and transparency returned at the worst possible moment. On November 8, 2016, the unthinkable happened. Hillary Clinton won nearly 3 million more votes nationwide, but Donald Trump shattered the blue wall, carrying Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The Electoral College delivered him the presidency. The 2016 election was more than a contest of two candidates. It symbolized a revolt against elites, the rise of populism, and the power of cultural identity in American politics. Trump's victory proved that the old rules no longer applied, that disruption, not decorum, had become the new currency of power. For some, it was a triumph of forgotten Americans finally reclaiming their voice. For others, it was a moment of fear and uncertainty about the country's direction. But no one could deny it. The 2016 campaign was an earthquake that forever reshaped American politics. The seventh party system, spanning from Bill Clinton's rise in 1992 to Donald Trump's shock victory in 2016, was defined by paradox. It was an era of globalization and dislocation, of technological expansion and social fracture, of cultural progress and political deadlock. Clinton's third-way centrism blurred partisan lines, but left many working-class Americans adrift. George W. Bush's presidency was consumed by war abroad and division at home. Barack Obama embodied historic change, yet presided over deepening polarization, gridlock, and a crisis of institutional trust. By the time the 2016 election arrived, America's party system was exhausted, unable to contain the forces of identity, resentment, and populism. The seventh system closed with an earthquake. Donald Trump's campaign shattered the assumptions of political elites, toppled the blue wall, and announced that populism, not establishment consensus, would dominate the new age. It was an ending marked not by resolution, but rupture, an era that revealed both the dynamism and fragility of America. The election of Donald Trump leaves us with important questions to ponder about the future. Can the United States reconcile identity with citizenship? Or will identity politics continue to fragment the nation into tribes that no longer share a common story? Will economic opportunity be rebuilt for the middle and working classes? Or will globalization, automation, and inequality permanently hollow out the social contract? Can democratic institutions adapt to the populist age? Or will faith in government, media, and law collapse under the weight of polarization and distrust? The journey continues.